Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I am O'Brien McMahon, and this is People Business. In this episode, I'm joined by Lisa Kleiman. Lisa is a public speaking coach, principal of Speaktopia, and author of You Got This, Everything You Need to Master Authentic Public Speaking. Lisa has held management and consulting positions at Fortune 500 companies, taught undergraduate and graduate business and managerial communication courses at Boise State University for over 15 years, and has coached individuals and facilitated hundreds of classes, workshops, and seminars on developing speaking and written skills for multiple audiences across the globe. I had a friend send me a webinar that Lisa was putting on assertive communication styles, and it really piqued my interest. And so I had reached out to Lisa and invited her on the show. And that is really what we dive into here. We talk about the difference between passive communication, aggressive communication, and somewhere in the middle, assertive communication. What it is, how to master it, how to start to be more assertive if you are more passive, and how to start to be less aggressive if that's the tendency that you have. There's a lot in here that help people, whether you are public speaking in front of a big group or communicating one-on-one, which can be just as hard depending on the subject matter that you're talking about. I hope you enjoy this. I think there's something in here for everybody. I know there was a lot that I took away from it. Here is Lisa Kleiman. Lisa, welcome to the show. Very excited to have you on and talk about what I think is probably the most important interpersonal skill, communication. So welcome.
Oh, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
How does one become a communication coach?
Well, there's not one road to that.
How did Lisa Kleiman become a communication coach?
Absolutely. Yeah, I can share you my story. Basically through necessity and need. Necessity in the way that when I was younger growing up, I was not that outspoken person. I tended to be more reserved and shy, fearful of having my voice. And that carried through with me through my education and college. After college, and I started my road down my profession, it became necessity because I didn't really have a choice. If I wanted to go anywhere with my profession, I had to be able to articulate and speak with others in a way that was effective. And I found that the more that I grew up the ladder in my profession, that it became more vital to be able to do that. And I had more and more speaking opportunities. So I got more experience and got better at it and worked in a Fortune 500 company, worked in the managerial area, marketing essentially, and eventually lived overseas and lived in Switzerland for about 5 years. I didn't know the local language very well, which was where I lived was two, German and French. And so the only thing I could really do that I found to continue working was to teach business English. And I worked one-on-one with executives and also with companies and group settings and so on, and help them with their specifically business English. But what I found interesting during that time was that, especially the executives, the thing that really stood out was their fear of public speaking. Yes, it was to help them with a language that was not their native language, but that was an area that they needed to focus on and wanted to be able to improve on. So when I moved back to the States, I decided to go back and get higher education and got a few more master level degrees and specialist degrees and certifications and so on. And that ultimately led to a full-time teaching position at a university, teaching undergraduate and graduate level managerial and business communications. I taught varying forms of communications in the workplace, which can be writing, such as writing proposals, putting together your job application materials, and so on and so on. But every class, and I did this for almost 2 decades, I would pull the students and ask them to not only talk about or focus on what their goals are and so on, but the areas that they most wanted to improve on. And it always came to communication and specifically public speaking. So it didn't take long to learn a clear need of what people needed to work on and improve on, and that is public speaking. And over the years, while I was in that profession, I would get contacted to do coaching work in public speaking. When I moved away or out of state, I was teaching in Idaho at Boise State University and moved to Southern California. Then I started to just take on more clients and then ultimately decided to do it full time, which is what I'm doing now. It's fun. that is how I became. I mean, honestly, I never would have guessed as a youngster that this is what I'd be doing now. The thing that I really feared a lot would be the actual profession that I would be focusing on.
Yeah. It's funny how those things happen in life. I've had plenty of experiences where I've said, man, I would never live there. Man, I would never work there. Man, I would never do that. And then lo and behold, several years later, I'm doing those things and enjoying them.
Yeah.
So the reason that I had reached out to you in the first place was a friend had passed along an event that you were putting on around assertive communication, and would love to unpack that a little bit with you today. Could you explain what is passive communication, what is aggressive communication, and what is assertive communication?
Yeah, absolutely. Those are the main categories related to speaking. They're quite different. Passive communication is such that you don't speak up. You don't share with others what you want. Essentially, you allow others to choose for you. People can be passive for a variety of reasons, but that includes avoiding conflict, not wanting to hurt other people's feelings, perhaps showing respect for them and so on, but ultimately wanting to please others. With that can shift responsibility then to others. That can be good or bad, but when you don't say what you want, then you don't have to take on that responsibility. But then it can also affect, or I should say negatively affect self-worth because you are not getting what you want. There are times and places where this might be the best means of communicating, including culturally or out of respect and so on, but not when it's negatively affects the person and their ability to get what they want and to help others. And when you do it too much in the wrong way, it's not a fun place to be. So that's the passive. On the opposite spectrum is aggressiveness. Aggressiveness ultimately is where the person chooses for others. They get what they want, but not usually in the best interest of others. An aggressive person usually tells instead of asks people about things, but can be in a way that can be harmful, either physically or mentally with negative wording and so on. And of course, obviously that can cause distress on others. They may use manipulation to meet their needs. They may undermine and use a variety of techniques that's not in the best interest of who they are talking to. So they may get what they want, but ultimately not in the most effective way. It's not typically the best communication style, especially in the workplace. Okay. So passive and aggressive. Now, in the middle of all this is assertive speaking. And assertive speaking is really a balance between the two. Assertive speakers tend to be more satisfied. They tend to be better leaders and so on, because an assertive person has a voice and a clear communication of what is wanted and what is needed, but also keeping in respect the thoughts, ideas, wants, and so on of other people. So it's an open and honest form of communication. Usually ideally it's straightforward and direct. In other words, it's clear what is being requested and asked. It ultimately converts into a win-win situation. The person can come across as being confident and goal-oriented, and like I mentioned before, respectful of others. In the workplace, these are the people that are the doers. They make things happen and they bring people in. With that, people feel more like they have a voice, that they are respected, that they are heard, and that they are in a safe place. Typically, these types of leaders then get the buy-in and agreement of people in order to achieve a goal. and make things happen. So people then tend to feel more satisfied in those type of workplaces. It's usually a much better place to be in the assertive speaking role than on the other passive and aggressive forms.
You kind of alluded to it before, but this is a scale. So you're not going to get people who fall perfectly into aggressive or perfectly into passive or maybe even stay in that style all the time. People have the ability to kind of move between styles depending on the situation. And, maybe they're not aggressive. Maybe they're more on the aggressive side, but they're not a total asshole. Is that fair?
Yeah. Well put it. Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, it is a spectrum, and not everyone is as at the same place all the time. And there is a time and need for a type of communication method to apply. Certainly not at the expense of others, where you are negatively harming anyone in any way and not able to achieve whatever your goals and so on is. But there can be varying forms of this. I mean, these are just labels that are put to it. I don't want people to get too caught up in labels, because it's more about the feeling and just knowing what to do without putting a whole lot of thought into it. But you could say, for example, there's a passive aggressive type of speech. And so that's
the worst.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sorry. Just had to get that in.
I agree with you 100%. It is the worst, because that is where someone is being aggressive, but not directly. So,
yeah. Well, and so that brings up the next question I have, which is, as you were talking and you were explaining passive aggressive and assertive, I was thinking there's also still like direct versus indirect. Could you talk to that? Or maybe I'm thinking of it the wrong way, but it seems like even somebody who's assertive may not be as direct as they need to be. Or maybe they're assertive, they're not aggressive, but they're a little too direct. How do you react to that comment?
Well, yeah. Indirect. Direct, we could describe it as being very clear of whatever it is your purpose is, whatever the communication or the messages that you want your audience to hear. There's no question as to whatever your motive and purpose is and what you want them to do and think and so on. Direct approach is the most common form in business, especially where we are busy people. And it's helpful to know your audience if that is the form that they want. The indirect approach, takes a while to get there. The indirect approach sometimes is used when delivering negative news, when you don't want people to immediately, hear that news and then put that wall up and not be willing to understand the reason behind that negative news. The problem with that is the risk, because people, when you take time to get there, they may get impatient and then they may put up their own walls and so on. Like, please just tell me, what do you want? Tell me what is it? That kind of a thing. So if you apply this to being assertive, usually the direct approach is better, but it just depends on the scenario audience. It's necessary to be very clear to avoid potential misunderstanding and frustration.
Yeah. And so I want to unpack this a little bit. And selfishly, I want to dive into the direct versus indirect conversation. But first, let's just start at the beginning. When you start working with somebody who wants to become a more assertive style speaker, where do you begin? What kind of assessment do you do? What kind of training, or what are the first steps? What does this look like?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, usually I start with a self-assessment, a self-awareness of that person, for them to really understand what are their potential limitations that they might have. Where are they comfortable and not so comfortable when they speak? And it can be just depends how much time the person and so on, but it could be very simple questions that just get them to reflect on themselves, and it can be diving into more depth about some of those specifics, such as with what person or who, we're talking about what topic, what's the scenario, and so on, where you ultimately feel more comfortable than you don't. And it can vary. It can be, we all have, for example, even our friends or colleagues that we've worked with a lot, and some are very open and we may have more of an assertive personality or style. And then there might be one or a few people where we, for whatever reason, we tend to fall on the more passive side because perhaps they have more of that assertive or even aggressive approach. And so we've developed a relationship in that way. And so you start to create an awareness of these things about yourself. And it can be a helpful starting point in order to know what is working already and to keep going with that in areas where you recognize that you can improve on, but also ultimately to identify these limiting beliefs that are really just in your head and they're not absolutely true at all. Sometimes we can self-destruct ourselves and we can go down this rabbit hole and think these negative thoughts about how we perceive people or how we think people might be perceiving us, which is absolutely not true at all. So it's a starting point with which to work from.
If we could, I would love to dive in there because I have a bunch of questions on this because I think this is a big issue, right? That we don't realize how we are being perceived by others and we just assume it. And, sometimes there are people who walk around and just assume everybody loves me, whether that's true or not, and vice versa.
Yeah.
How do we get better self-awareness around how our current style is being received by others?
Well, there are a variety of things. First is the intention and willingness to actually focus on it and take notice and want to improve it. It's just like using filler words and habits that we have. The only way you're going to change it is to be intentional about it. So that's one thing. The other thing is to get feedback from it. And you don't necessarily, if you don't have an opportunity or don't want to or afraid to have others help you with it, then just simply record yourself. And you can create scenarios, maybe role plays and things, and then do at least an audio, but better as a video recording. There are lots of software, even AI programs out there now that will provide you wonderful feedback on your filler words and verbiage and eye contact and those things. And so that can at least help you to flesh out yourself what works and what you need to work on. So that's one thing. The other thing that's helpful, and this is regarding any communication, is to get some structure, just refine your communication. And this can apply with assertiveness, becoming that assertive speaker. And that starts with knowing what your purpose is. What do you want? What is your purpose? What do you hope to achieve with this message? If you don't know, you can't expect your audience to know. Often when people don't know, that's when they talk all over the place and they use a lot of words to try to get there and figure it out verbally what they want.
That's true in big presentations and in one-on-one communication. You see that happen in both places.
Oh, absolutely. Right. Even just casual conversation. It can be, we've all been there where someone is going on and on and on. And you're just like, oh, please, when will this end? What do they want? Just tell me.
The other thing that I have found that's really interesting is somebody who is comfortable with the answer generally talks shorter, and somebody who is uncomfortable generally talks longer. We have a pretty transparent sales culture in the organization where I work. People can see everybody else's results and you get questioned on those results. And it's always the people who are underperforming who have the longest answers and say the least. The people who are performing, even if they have to answer a hard question, they generally say it with less words because they just, here's what it is. And they come with more confidence, which means they don't feel like they need to take up a lot of time.
Yeah, that is so true. And that's another thing that I recommend to people when they're speaking, whatever the form is to know what you're talking about. Even usually when you're asked to speak something or you initiate to speak something, because you at least know something about it. But if you have time to prepare do even more research. Now, what's the latest upcoming research? What do other people think about it? What their opinions, their motivation, pros and cons, and so on and so on. Because then you can articulate your message so much easier. You can find those words that you want to show that's best on the spot for that setting and audience.
Yeah. Want to stay on this direct communication theme for a second, because we talked about getting more self-aware, but I think there's the other fear that comes in that as I get more direct, that's going to change how a person reacts to what I say. And I think we can mistake assertiveness for aggressiveness and think that somebody's going to be really upset when what we're actually doing is just being clearer in our communication. Can you talk to how you help people through that fear?
Yeah. And I would say that if we're going to label that falls more into the line of being passive, because you're worried about people hurting people's feelings and how they react. And so then you may not say what you want to say based on those fears. Whereas an aggressive person would just go ahead and say it, maybe not in so much in the best way, because they're not really focusing on the feelings of others. How can one, as they become more direct, which is a great thing, but how can you be confident about speaking, especially information that maybe will be well received by the audience? And part of that, as I said before, is knowing your purpose, but also understanding the reasoning behind the message. If, let's say that you have to let people know, you have to tell people no. Maybe they're asking for whatever, something. Nobody wants to be told that they can't get what they want. Well, if you have a clear reason behind why you need to tell them no, then they may not like it, of course, but if they understand that reasoning, they are more likely to accept it and maybe even act on it depending on the situation. Then you don't want to beat around the bush, because then that can make it come across in the wrong way, right? If you show that you are nervous about saying it, then that can create a heightened sense of nervousness to the person who's the receiver, the listener, and so on. So you want to do it as confidently as possible and be as clear, as specific as possible. Always respectful of that person. But like I mentioned before, if you know what it is, the reasoning behind it, that's really one of the big key factors in having an effective result of how the person receives that information.
If we could use a real world example, maybe you can give me a little coaching, and this can help listeners think through this, because I realized that I was doing this the other day. I have a colleague of mine who I'm partnered with. We have been talking through what this person is going through. I realized indirectly, offer some advice, offer some help, ask some questions that maybe get them to think a little differently. And in reality, I have not just come out and said the thing that I should have said, which is the direct feedback that's going to sting when I say it. And so how would you suggest that I approach this next conversation I have with this person so that I can feel more confident in being direct and handle that situation more appropriately?
Well, there are various ways to do that. So what I share with you is not the ultimate or only way to do that, but you want to avoid any kind of blaming you statements and those kinds of things. This is where you might start with the I statement, which takes the focus more on you and how you feel and what you've been doing rather than on their situation. So you might start with, I've been feeling a little remiss because I haven't shared with you something that I think that can be very important for you to understand, and then go from that point. You keep in mind, you always want to focus on the task and the event, the request, and so on, not necessarily on the person. And you can include with that some questions to get them to, like you had done before, but make it perhaps a little more direct to get them to create an awareness themselves of what's going on and where you want them to think and what you want them to do. So without knowing too much detail of your specific situation,
so the situation, I can tell you more that obviously don't want to give away anything to anyone who listens who does know me and who this might be, but it is a person who's developing a bad reputation. I don't know that they realize quite the negative reputation that they're building. And so I need to I want to deliver the feedback that, hey, I don't think you realize it, but you're developing a pretty tough reputation here, and it's going to take some repair.
Okay. Yeah. Well, what I would recommend, given that knowledge information, is to perhaps start with something that's positive, a compliment, like we'll just call him, well, I don't know if it's him or her, but let's just say John Doe. And so you say something like, John Doe, you're so good at whatever it is, such and such. I really admire this. But you may come across in such and such format. I've had some feedback of people who have said this, and I just wanted to talk with you and get your input on what you think about this, why you think they may be feeling that way, and then just at least go down that road and that perspective. Being assertive does take that initiative. It does take that energy, putting yourself out to do that. and just be prepared and open and be focused on that person, not be distracted. All of these other things that can affect the communication, right? So that's what I would do is start out with a compliment, be as specific as you can without just name calling and blaming but letting them know clearly what's going on and trying to work towards a solution.
Okay. And so let's just carry that on. And again, this is for anybody, but what happens if that person does react poorly? Because that's the fear, right? Or it could be one of the fears is, well, now I'm creating a situation where there could be some real conflict. Like if they come back at me, now I have to either continue to be assertive or I have to go passive. And, that makes me uncomfortable. What guidance do you have there?
Yeah. Well, it's important to continue to be assertive, but always being assertive is respectful of that person and what they're thinking and so on. You never, of course, want to mimic someone who is aggressive and emotionally upset. It can be very hard to do, especially if they respond in a way that can be hurtful to you. If they're name calling, or certainly if it's physical and you're in any kind of danger, then you have to do what you need to do to be safe. This is for anyone. But oftentimes when people react that way, especially maybe in this situation, is because they feel hurt and maybe they're embarrassed about it, and they feel like they don't have a voice, or for whatever reason, they're feeling bad. And so they respond. It's a natural reaction for a lot of people to respond emotionally about something regarding that essentially the fight or flight type of a response. And we can take that either way. If you are that person, you're the deliver that message, then try to be as calm as possible while being assertive. Maybe take a deep breath. Don't react. Take a moment to reflect, and then let that person acknowledge that you are hearing that person. And that can just be even paraphrasing or summarizing in a way their feelings, like, John, I can understand how you would feel this way. All right. I get that. It makes sense why you are feeling blah, blah, blah. I hear you. And then ask them a few questions. Like, I know you're not that kind of a person. So what's going on? And then again, trying to go towards that resolution. You want to try to get them to know that they are being heard, that they have your attention, that they are loved, so to speak. You are striving for a win-win solution for both, or at least some kind of a solution for all involved.
Okay. It reminds me, I've interviewed 2 hostage negotiators on here.
Yeah.
And one of them was talking about how labeling emotions lowers negative emotions. So if you can say to somebody, it seems like you're feeling blank. It seems like you're upset. Feels like that really hit you harder than you expected it to, and then allow them to express themselves, that actually can lower the emotion on behalf of the other person. And both of them talked about the teeter-totter between emotion and rationality. And so if somebody starts to get emotional, you just have to realize that they're not going to be very rational, and you can't have that rational conversation until you get their emotion back down. And that's true for you too. If that person says something to you and your emotions flare, you've lost the ability to be rational. So you have to bring your emotion back down before you can have your ration come up.
Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes it takes connecting to that with that person at another time. If you can't get there, then just be open about it. Like, it's like, you're upset about it. I'm going to be honest with you. I'm a little bit upset and I really want to help you with this. Let's go just take a break and then get back to this. Sometimes you can do that. Sometimes you can't. Sometimes you have to address it on the spot depending on what the circumstances are. But yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with that. That it's the best thing you can do is not let your emotions get out of control yourself, because it's really hard to think clear, have that clear head that you need to in order to rationally be able to come to the solution. But so then
I like that feedback. Yeah. I like that concept of just, if you feel that happening either for them or you or both, just to say, hey, I feel like this is getting a little, hot. There's a lot here. This is heavy. Let's just take a second. Let's process this. And, can we meet tomorrow, or can we meet later this week and continue the conversation when we both had a chance to process this?
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
I like that. What do we do when we are faced with somebody who is an aggressive speaker, when they come to us? Is there anything different that we can do when somebody approaches us with an aggressive style?
Well, I think it's very similar. If they come to you, the first thing is to make sure that you are safe, that they can't harm you, physically harm you and hurt you in any way. And if that's the case, like I said, bring in a third party or do what you need to do in that respect. But again, you don't want to react. They are reacting, and you want to try to get them in a calmer state, acknowledge their feelings, give it a moment, maybe get them in the right setting. Okay, perhaps they're in a public place and they're disrupting the work environment or others so maybe you could just calmly say, okay, John Doe, let's go in this room. Let's where it's private in here. We can talk in privacy, something like that. Maybe get them to sit down instead of standing up. People can, if they're standing up, then they can create more energy. So sitting down can maybe just body movements, body language, and so on can help them to calm down. Be the model of where you want them to be. And you want to be that calm person. That's what they're looking for. Most people aren't wanting to get into that fighting response. They don't want you to react back. Their adrenaline's going usually, and their cortisol's kicked in and all these things are happening. They need to have this release. And their emotions are all over the place and they need to have this release. So you do as best as you can to try to get them to calm down, to clear their head and themselves to be able to think logically and rationally and have that. Yeah. I hear you. I see you. I get that. I understand you are really upset about that. Let's see how can we break this apart? What can we do? Help me to understand what's going on here.
What are things that people can say when somebody is mean to them? Like in the office, I was talking to someone the other day who's the head of HR for a large company, and they were saying how their CEO can actually be mean and say some things that are really hurtful when he's upset about something, and that it'll just come out. Do you have any good tactical things that people can say in the moment or can think in the moment to either respond or to get themselves out of that situation and have enough time to prepare a better response? Like, would love any guidance on that, because I think that can really throw people off when somebody comes at them and says something that is actually hurtful.
Yeah, and I empower everyone in these circumstances to have a voice, and I understand that's not necessarily easy, especially if it's a leader position, maybe higher, a few levels even higher than you. Mm-hmm. But it's even more important to be assertive in these cases, especially if it is negatively affecting you, affecting the person. And that is to then use the I statements like Mr. Smith or John or Cindy, whomever it is. I feel poorly that when you use these words on me, and I wasn't prepared for this type of reaction regarding the situation. What do you do? And then just kind of maybe some questions like, do you feel that I'm doing this? Or getting them to help them to understand the situation. But I think it's helpful to let people know they may not realize this person. Let's say if someone is throwing out these negative, harsh words or words that are not clear, but they may critique others, to use that. I don't feel very good when you say this to me, and at least start from that point.
Yeah, I think that's good. Just letting somebody know, like, hey, do you have any idea how hurtful that is?
Yeah.
A lot of times they don't. Yeah.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. What about dealing with somebody who has a passive style? I think we've all been in those situations too, where we need some input from somebody, or we are looking for collaboration, or we need somebody to step up and they have more of a passive style and they won't engage fully, or they won't be direct with what they want. What can we do to encourage people or get what we need from people who have a passive style?
Yeah, well, I recommend having multiple ways of getting people to share their input and have a voice and so on. And that may not be vocal. It could be in written format. Some people are really super afraid of public speaking. And even with people they've worked with for many years, you put several people in a room. Perhaps it's just a department meeting of 10 people or 5 people even. And there may be some people that are more dominant speakers who tend to take over the conversations and so on. And some people just aren't comfortable interrupting. So you want to be able to have means and places where people feel that they are respected and that it's safe, that they won't be judged and it's okay, whatever they say. And so that might include scheduling in time for everyone to have their say in a meeting and being very clear and staying on top of that and stopping people when they've gone over their time, respectful of what they said, but just letting people, reminding them that everyone needs to share something. If we have more time at the end of this meeting, then yes, let's get back to you and you can elaborate more on whatever you're talking about. It might involve pairing up people who may more be comfortable with each other, or having those conversations in private settings where you can focus on that person, not others who are involved, and getting them to open up. It could be just in written format and maybe anonymously, where you ask people to share their input and maybe in some type of a place where their name is not on there. Or if it does, they feel that they have more of a voice, something like that. It can be multiple means of doing that, but it's important that these people feel like they can talk and that there's that safe place. They won't be judged and so on. Asking questions is a great way to get people to open up.
Yeah. And, it's funny. I was sitting in a presentation yesterday on recognition and employee recognition. And that term for me, employee recognition programs, has always been kind of hard to define, but somebody redefined it yesterday and they said behavioral reinforcement program. And I thought that was such a great reframe, that if you give somebody a compliment and you praise the behaviors that you want, you're reinforcing those behaviors. It comes directly from How to Win Friends and Influence People, and I'm sure a bunch of other places. But I thought that was great. And that definitely applies to what we're talking about today, that when you do start to get a little bit from those quiet, passive people, reinforce it, and start to draw a little more out. And it might take some time, but it seems like that would be a way to get people out of their shell.
Oh, absolutely. And you can do that yourself as well for trying to improve and increase your confidence to speak and have that assertive voice. Take little baby steps if needed and reward yourself, because you can change the patterns in the brain to go to those happy, feel good places on the spot. And so if you just saying no to someone, if you tend to be that person who doesn't say no and worried about hurting the other person, well, do. And you could do that with people to start. And then just take intention. Maybe it's to draw a happy face on the back of your hand, or to take a 5-minute break, or go get some ice cream or something. But if you do that repeatedly, then you're going to have those feel-good triggers. Like, okay, it's okay to say no with reason and purpose, still being respectful and all of those things. But the fact that I said no and I meant it, I'm going to reward myself and feel good about it.
Yeah. Let's say that somebody does go too far, right? We're practicing this, they say something that does hurt somebody else's feelings. What does the repair look like to kind of walk that back and fix that problem? What do those communications look like?
The fact that you recognize that you went too far is essentially the first step. So it's that recognition. Oh gosh, I went too far. And anybody can do that, where maybe you're over talking somebody and you're going on and on and on and on. And then you're like, oh, wait a minute. This person hasn't said a word in a long time and it's just been me talking. So it's that acknowledgement, or just stopping and having that awareness. Like, you can see it. You're reading their face, right? It's written all over their body language, how they're reacting, and it's not good. Okay. So you just stop, take a moment, reflect, get your own emotions back in check as needed. And that can include not necessarily heightened negative emotions, but even if you're over the top excited, sometimes that can be too much for someone.
Yeah.
So you want to get your emotions back in check, and then to acknowledge and just be upfront with your audience, whether it's one or more people. And maybe it's admitting to it, like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. I just went off in a tangent and I didn't realize where I was going. I really want to hear your input on this. I am so sorry. Please tell me. Something like that, for example.
Yeah. I got that advice from a leadership development coach a number of years ago, and I found that it's just been so helpful that it's not about walking around and getting it right all the time, but it's trying to be as clear and direct as you can. And when you overdo it, you can repair it. That those things can be repaired. There's very little that can't be repaired if you just have the humility to apologize and have the self-awareness of what you've done.
Yeah. I mean, it's being authentic. We're humans.
Yeah.
And we all make mistakes and we all go off in varying tangents and so on and so on. And we understand that people can be empathetic as long as they know that they are being respected. And sometimes when you admit to being at fault and admit to doing something that you didn't intentionally want to happen, if you let people know that, they'll respect you even more for showing up and taking responsibility for what you said in your actions.
Yeah. They may not forgive you on Twitter, but interpersonally, they will forgive you.
So true.
Yeah, unfortunately. Do you have any other exercises that people can use, even just good beginner exercises, to start to move in a more assertive direction?
Yeah, I do. Beginner part of this is to write down what it is that you want. At least start there. I want this. Know what you want. And then write it out. Write out your script. I want this. Then you could add a few things, the reasons why, and so on. And then put yourself out there. It takes effort, but the more you do it, the easier it gets. If you're not going to do it, you're going to continue on the way you are. And if you're not happy with it, then you're going to continue in that way. So give it a try. It can be trial and error. Sometimes things work and strategies work, and sometimes they don't. But take the initiative and assess it. If you put yourself out there, you tried it, it didn't work as well, then come back, reflect, and try to understand what happened. What might you do differently next time? The other thing I recommend is that people practice. Role playing is a wonderful way to practice, and you can role play with a computer who would provide you some feedback, but I recommend with an actual human being, and maybe create some real situations and settings without, of course, disclosing information that might be harmful to others. But just having that practice and that conversation can make it easier.
Yeah. And I just want to reinforce that, because it's easy to listen to that and say, oh, that's a good idea. And it's very hard to actually go, okay, I'm going to do this role play, because unless somebody's making you do it, they're uncomfortable and people just don't want to do it. I've seen it happen all the time. As a salesperson who's worked with a sales coach for 9 or 10 years now, maybe longer, we've done a lot of role play, and I can tell you it just makes it better every time. And I've put some of my friends through role play scenarios from time to time. They'll say like, oh yeah, I have this thing going on. I'll be like, oh, well, let's role play. What are they going to say? And immediately they go, I'd probably say something like this. I'm like, no, just say it how you would say it. And you can just see people get uncomfortable right away. So yes, it can be uncomfortable. Yes, a lot of people want to avoid it, but I just encourage anybody out there, if you have something that you are trying to work through, or you have something that's going to be a little bit of a difficult conversation for whatever reason, find somebody who's safe and role play it.
Yeah, someone who's safe. I love that. Someone that you are comfortable in, that can provide you that honest feedback, and that it's okay. You can do it multiple times. The first time may not be that easy, and you're going to use those filler words, the you may use more words than you need to and struggle to get there. But then the next time you'll do it a little bit better and a little bit better, and so on and so on. So it takes steps, but the only way you're going to get better is to actually try.
Yeah. And just one story on this is I was mentoring a guy. We were role playing a conversation that he was going to have with a prospective client. He said what he wanted to say to me, and it was indirect. And I just played it back to him. I said, here's what you just said. And he's like, yeah, that doesn't sound very good. So he tried again, and I just played it back for him. He's like, yeah, still doesn't sound very good. I just kept telling him how I was interpreting what he was saying, or how it was making me feel on the other end. After maybe 12 times through it, he just, pardon the language, but he's just like, God damn it, O'Brien. All I want to say is blah, 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 blah. And he just like let me have it. And I said, yeah. And he said, what do you mean? Yeah. I said, that was it. That's what you said. I said, maybe take the tone down a little bit, but that was it. And it's funny how you have to just get all the business speak and jargon and ego and whatever caveats. You have to like get all that out to realize that you're doing it and have somebody reflect it back on you to finally get through that filter to just say, boom, here's the direct assertive thing that I want to say. And then I can shut up and we can have the real conversation we want to have.
He was lucky to have you. You were a great partner for him.
I don't think he felt lucky that day, but maybe in hindsight, he appreciated it. Yeah. It was funny. I was laughing. He was not feeling very good about it, but it was, we got to a good spot. He had a good conversation with the guy.
Oh, that's great. Yeah. And part of this is your nonverbals as well. And that's something that you can practice on, especially because a lot of us are so much on our cell phones. And so we're hunched over and we've developed these habits of being hunched over. But when you want to address something, you want to talk about what you have, then purposefully, mindfully, be as the best posture as you possibly can. And you've probably heard this, the power pose, right? And where you're standing with both feet firmly planted on the ground about hip distance apart, whether you're seated or standing. But the thing about that is that it also, if your spine is as straight as possible, then you're able to get those breaths in and out a lot more easily and get the oxygen that you need. And so that's your power behind your voice. And you need to be able to breathe in or you can't get any air out. And people can practice this, hunch over and try to talk, and then stand up as straight as you can and try to talk. You'll notice a difference. And then you'll also come across as confident to that person. You'll appear as if you mean what you say and that you have your attention focused on them. And then you can have that eye contact as appropriate. Cultures and things can change that, but posture does play a big role in communication, more so in just the vocals.
Yeah, I think this is a missed opportunity for people with virtual meetings because you can see yourself. And so you can actually see what the other person is seeing. If you're not framed up very well, like if you don't look good on screen or if you don't feel good energy coming off of yourself, you can actually see it. And so I talk to a lot of people who say, oh yeah, I turn my video off, or I hide that or whatever, so I can't see myself. I don't want to see myself. I think that's a missed opportunity to actually coach yourself and get some real feedback on what you look like. And that, I think, translates into the real world where if you just get used to putting on a good nonverbal communication persona virtually, then you're naturally using those mannerisms in the real world too.
Yeah, and I coach people and recommended that to people as well, that in the virtual place to turn on your camera and practice talking to that camera.
Yeah.
That is the eye of your audience, and really practice and do it when you are sitting up or standing up as tall as possible, and just be mindful of what the camera sees. But the more you can practice and get comfortable with that, like you said, it can carry over to the face-to-face communication.
Yeah. And I would just encourage anyone who's listening, we are past 3 years through the pandemic. We've been on virtual calls for a long, long time now. Just if you haven't yet, take the 5 minutes and Google good virtual video framing and just get yourself set up the right way, because it makes a huge difference in how somebody perceives you.
Yeah, that's great advice. And it's surprising that people still don't think about that.
I know. It is surprising, but it happens. Yeah. I came from my background in college. I was a communications major, and I studied film and filmmaking in college. And so framing and the rule of thirds and lighting and like all that stuff those were conversations that we were having back then. And so when Zoom meetings became a thing, it was easy to say, oh, well, I just need to frame myself up in this. And so how do we do that? But a lot of people had never thought about that before.
Yeah, that's right. And people, they have the option. You can usually to turn on or off your camera. And unless it really clearly is you're not well set up and it can detract from your message. If that's not the case, then it can add the value, because people can then at least be able to read you. They can see your nonverbals, match that up to your voice, and feel like they're more engaged and connected to you than not.
Yeah. Well, Lisa, this has been a wonderful conversation. Anything we didn't cover, anything I didn't ask about this that you think is best practice or that you would want to share with listeners before we sign off?
Yeah, well, communication is a broad field, and we focus primarily on being assertive and what that means all around that. And it falls within communication assertiveness. I just really recommend that people not get too caught up in all of these details. You don't want to come across as being rote or thinking about what you're not doing. With that, then you get sidetracked and forget what to say and worry and stress and so on. So just ultimately be just the authentic you. Just relax into that. Know that we are all human and have your voice. Say what you want to say. Yes, of course, keep putting intention. Keep building the practice. For some people, journaling is helpful to them. If that might be helpful to you, then keep track and journal your progress, because you can celebrate your successes and then work on improving areas that you know and recognize where you need to improve on. But again, just know that we are all human. We are all not perfect. Communication is a skill you can develop just like anything, like playing an instrument. So you can get better and better and better at it. And with that, it can become a lot more fun. It can become easier. And you may be surprised at how well it can greatly impact and benefit your life. So just keep putting yourself out there, keep a positive mindset, and you will have a more fulfilling life.
I love that. Find your intention. Just keep putting yourself out there, using your voice and being authentic. Lisa, thank you for coming on the show and sharing all this. It was helpful for me, and I think it'll be helpful for others too.
Oh, wonderful. I enjoyed it. Thank you so much for this time. I appreciate it.
Hey folks, one last thing before you go. If you enjoyed the episode, make sure to hit subscribe so you can stay up to date with future guests. That's it. Thanks for coming. Go make the most of your business and the people in it.